And now for our program. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to fellow Davidsonian Janet M. Stovall, class of 1985. Janet is currently serving her second term as a trustee and is also the proud parent of a 2020 graduate. Beyond her deep ties to Davidson, Janet is the founder of Pragmatic Diversity, a DEI consultancy focused on delivering actionable and measurable strategies for inclusion. A global consultant and speaker, her 3 TED presentations have reached millions. She is also the co-author of the Amazon bestseller, The Conscious Communicator, The Fine Art of Not Saying Stupid Shit. And I am now thrilled to turn the program over to Janet.
Thank you, Judith. An oriki, from the Yoruba words ori meaning head and ki meaning to great praise, is an attributive descriptive. It expresses what a child is or is hoped to become. It's intended to have a stimulating aspirational effect on the bearer. It's not just dialogue from Game of Thrones. But now nobody gave me an oriki as a child. That's just not something Black folks did in North Carolina when I was coming up. So my oriki is self-bestowed. It's a statement not of who I might become, but of what I am. Now that last descriptor is one that few would actually claim, but I haven't just claimed it. I wake up like that every day, still do. Back in 1984, when I wrote Project 87 at Davidson, I didn't have a name like that for myself. I didn't give myself that title actually until I was writing my 2018 TED Talk. By then, I knew that's who I'd always been. But before I realized it, I banged my head against a lot of walls, trying to fight for equity and trying to do the work of inclusion. But since I've cracked the code on my DNA, DEI, my DEI DNA, I'm gonna mess that up tonight. I've been a lot less frustrated and a lot more successful at actually doing the work. Now, it's not that the work got any easier. It's just that I got better at doing it at my highest level of ability. And now my goal is to help others figure out how to do that too, because the work of equity and inclusion needs the best of all of us, now more than ever. So I'm working on a book. Now what? Fighting for equity when nobody else gives a damn. And I promise you, I'm working as fast as I can, because the last thing we need right now is people giving up, burning out, walking away. Many already have. But maybe, just maybe, if I can help others, including you, fight for equity in the way that you're able to do it best, perhaps I can convince you to endure. Because the work of equity and inclusion needs the best of all of us, now more than ever. Now What introduces a comprehensive framework for understanding and doing inclusion in your personal and professional life. It features 3 models that help you answer 4 big questions to help you figure out who you are, where you are, and what gets in the way, and what you can do about it. It also helps you understand how to work with others who may or may not share your DNA, so you can create more successful organizations and better teams. I'm going to explain all 3, but tonight we're really only going to focus on that first one, the doing model. As I said earlier, I've been fighting the fight for equity personally, professionally, formally, and informally for more than 40 years. In that time, I've met a lot of people with many different perspectives. The doing model is just my way of categorizing them based on how they view equity. Doing is an acronym for the 5 main archetypes that I've identified: disaggregationist, opportunist, interventionist, neutralist, and globalist. Why focus on equity perspectives? Because the way you view equity determines how you do inclusion. And of the 3 things represented by the DEI acronym that we can't use anymore, inclusion is the only one that's actually actionable by everyone, no matter what seat you're in. So if you can better understand how you see equity, I believe you can better do the work of inclusion. Here's how the model works. Your archetype name is a way of identifying your distinct DEI DNA. And the DNA is made up of 4 key elements. Equity focus is what you prioritize when thinking about equity and fairness. The group approach describes how you interact with and support diverse groups. Your equity stance is how you view the needs of the less privileged relative to the needs of the dominant class. And core mission is your ultimate why for caring about equity in the first place. If you can understand these 4 elements, then you can better leverage your strengths, address your blind spots, and become a more effective advocate for equity and inclusion. Now, I know this might be a little bit confusing, but let's dig a little bit deeper on each one, and I think it'll make better sense. Starting with the disaggregationist. Now, the disaggregationist equity lens focuses on a specific group, whichever one is catching the most hell at any given time. Their equity focus calls for specificity, for sorting people into distinct groups with unique needs. Disaggregationists don't view diversity as a one-size-fits-all concept. They don't treat it as a monolith. Disaggregationists avoid generalization. They hate the term people of color and the POC acronym that goes with it. They love objective data so they can provide targeted support and customized solutions. Disaggregationists see the underrepresented groups' needs as central. For them, the needs of the most harmed are the needs that matter most. Their core vision, personally, is to help most harmed. Professionally, they'll work to uplift marginalized groups. Now, let's look at some people who actually fit this category. Historically, consider Ida B. Wells. She's a journalist who investigated and exposed lynching, focusing on the specific harm that it did to Black Americans and the need for targeted solutions. Susan B. Anthony, she fought for women's suffrage, even if she only fought for white women's suffrage. Contemporarily, we have legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. Kimberly Crenshaw was the one who actually coined the term intersectionality. Now, even though that's changed a lot, when she came up with it, her point was she was examining legal cases, and she argued that courts often overlook how Black women face unique discrimination due to being both Black and female. So while that term's meaning has evolved, her initial focus was on understanding the specific challenges of this group. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon actually sponsored a highly successful initiative, Advancing Black Pathways. It prioritized the needs of the specific group that data showed was most marginalized. Next up, the opportunist. Opportunists see the incredible potential that diversity brings. Their equity focus is utility, and they are about leveraging the unique abilities and talents that diverse groups bring to the table. Now, I know how that sounds. It sounds like exploitation. It's exactly why the traditional business case for diversity gets slammed by so many practitioners and activists. But in a capitalist economy, diversity in the workplace is about delivering outcomes. Inclusion isn't about feeling valued. Inclusion is about being able to deliver value. And if one's diversity, if their difference equates to higher value, that's a good thing. Opportunists excel at creating opportunities for collaboration, cross-cultural exchange, and fostering a sense of shared purpose. They believe in giving everyone a chance to contribute their skills and succeed, and meeting everyone's needs based on the impact of that. Personally, they see equity as a path to an expanded view of the world. Professionally, they're motivated to build diverse teams and organizations that drive innovation and growth. For some historical opportunists, look to Madam C.J. Walker. She was an entrepreneur and philanthropist who built a successful business selling hair care products for African American women. She saw the value in addressing the specific needs of her community and used her unique perspectives to do that and to innovate. Philosopher John Stuart Mill, surprisingly, argued that diverse perspectives are important for societal progress. He valued considering different viewpoints for better solutions. Now, while his focus wasn't modern social diversity as we think about it, his emphasis on varied perspectives aligns with valuing differences in general, despite his colonialist views in support of British imperialism. Contemporary examples include Coca-Cola CEO James Quincy, who has often stated that diverse and inclusive companies perform better, and he works to connect Coca-Cola's DEI efforts to innovation and growth because he sees diversity as key to understanding Coke's global customer base. Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff is a strong advocate for workplace equality and has championed initiatives like equal pay benefits. He argues that diversity is essential for building successful and innovative companies. Interventionists are forces for change. They're driven by a deep understanding that inequity is not about individual biases, but about the systems that perpetuate injustice. Their equity focus is equity and actively challenging and dismantling these systems of oppression and discrimination. You'll find interventionists leading workshops and protests. They facilitate difficult conversations and they use their voices to advocate for change. They too recognize that one-size-fits-all solutions rarely work when addressing complex systems. So they customize their approach to target specific ways that those systems impact different marginalized groups. Interventionists believe in systemic change, and they believe in challenging the status quo to create a more just and equitable society. But in an inequitable world, equity itself is disruption. So they know that underrepresented folks' needs will conflict with those of the dominant group. So a strong sense of justice and commitment to fighting for the rights of the marginalized groups are at the heart of their personal and professional mission. Examples include Nelson Mandela, anti-apartheid revolutionary and political leader who dedicated his life to dismantling inequitable systems in South Africa. He was a powerful advocate for systemic change and social justice. Cesar Chavez, the labor leader and civil rights activist who fought for the rights of farm workers in the United States, worked to dismantle exploitative labor practices and to empower marginalized workers through collective action. Alicia Garza is an activist and writer known for co-founding Black Lives Matter. She focused on dismantling systemic racism and advocating for the rights and liberation of Black people. Then there's Judith Heumann. She's an internationally recognized leader in the disability rights movement. She has been instrumental in advocating for legislation and policies that combat discrimination and promote the inclusion of people with disabilities. Now we're on to the neutralists. Neutralists believe in fairness and respect for all. Their equity focus is on ensuring that everyone is treated equally, regardless of their background. They believe in uniformity, putting their focus on shared issues rather than difference. That focus and a group approach that seeks to homogenize might sound a little bit like they're part of that I don't see color brigade. Well, they're not. They believe in equality of opportunity, but only if there's a level playing field where everyone has a fair chance to succeed. Needless to say, they're not fond of the way meritocracy is being used right now. Neutralists work to create welcoming and inclusive environments where everyone can feel valued and they can feel respected, more often where they can deliver value. For them, it's like taking a bunch of different puzzle pieces and fitting them together perfectly to create a smooth, unified picture. So they see needs as consistent, and their core mission is personally to treat everyone alike and to ensure equal treatment in the workplace. When you think about neutralists, think about Mahatma Gandhi, who emphasized treating everyone alike and promoting equal rights and opportunities, or Eleanor Roosevelt, who championed human rights and social justice and equal rights and legal protections. I'm going to say her name wrong, but I think it's Michelle Bachelet, former UN Commissioner for Human Rights. She focused on universal human rights, advocating for consistent standards and protections for all. And then finally, there's Jacinda Ardern, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, who's known for her compassionate and inclusive leadership that emphasized kindness, empathy, and unity, and focused on finding common ground. Finally, there's the globalist. Globalists see the world as one interconnected community. The exact opposite of populists, they believe that we're all in this world together and that certain standards are relevant to all. Their equity focus celebrates the richness of diversity and human cultures equally. Globalists believe that needs are contextual, different groups, different places, different issues. They know that diversity and equity are different depending on where you are, and they're committed to respecting those cultural nuances. Globalists focus on the interconnectedness of the world. They move away from those potentially superficial celebrations of culture and towards a deeper understanding of how global systems actually impact equity. Examples include South African cleric and activist Desmond Tutu, who worked to end apartheid and promote reconciliation. He emphasized understanding different cultures and working towards global solutions. The Dalai Lama advocates for compassion, peace, and understanding among different cultures and religions. He emphasizes equality and respect for diverse perspectives globally. Right now, we have ADP CEO Carlos Rodriguez, who emphasizes creating a global and inclusive workplace that reflects the diversity of ADP's clients and employees. And then there's Shabani CEO Hamdi Ulukaya, who's a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion. And he's spoken often about building a company that reflects global multiculturalism. He traditionally hires refugees and immigrants, and he promotes a culture of belonging. Now, I know that was a lot, and I went through it quickly, but here you can see them all in one place. So look at that, and you see how they all line up. I've also created a summary, and you're going to get that as part of the follow-up email that Judith is going to send out at some point after this call. It's a summary of it, so you won't have to remember all this. Now, remember, I said that the book has 3 models. Well, let's take a very brief look at the other 2. I want to save as much time as possible for questions because I'm hoping you have some. Once you know who you are, you have to figure out where you are. That's what the work model is for. It helps you understand your organization's outlook on inclusion. This determines how you actually approach the work of equity where you are. Identifying your organization's archetype is crucial to inclusion. You got to figure out how to be who you are in that environment. Now, in the book, I'll detail some well-known companies that fit these categories, and I'll explain why they fit the categories. Shout out to current student Beth Holmes for being an amazing research assistant and helping me get that done. And once you know who and where, it's time for you to figure out what. That's what the Empower model is designed to help you do. It defines what inclusion truly means for your organization because it's different for every organization. I think about it as a continuum between Abercrombie and Fitch and Ben and Jerry's. Needless to say, inclusion means very different things at those 2 different places. Well, this model is about taking ownership of as you are, where you are. The book brings all 3 of these models together to explain how the different archetypes operate in the varying environments to tackle their unique inclusion challenges. It also suggests how a group of different archetypes can actually work together successfully as a powerful team. Now, if I can just get this book done. But if you remember nothing else about what I said tonight, I hope you'll think about this. In the workplace, diversity is not a problem to solve. Diversity solves problems. Inclusion isn't about feeling valued. Inclusion is being able to deliver value. And equity is not about fair people. Equity is about fair systems. Because in an inequitable world, equity itself is disruption. But the work of equity and inclusion needs the best of all of us now more than ever. Thank you. And I think now we're going to move to questions. I think Judith was catching up with those. But while she's pulling that together, when you get the handout afterwards, there will actually be a link so that you can take a modified version of the survey and figure out what your archetype is.
Thank you, Janet.
You're welcome.
All right, so as a reminder, anyone is welcome to post their questions using the Q&A feature. Again, you can find that at the bottom of your screen. It's either as part of your black bar, there's a little square comment box with the question mark saying Q&A, or you can click the more button and you should see the Q&A feature pop up. So as folks are posting their questions, Janet, I wonder if you could tell us, can you tell us which person you are?
Oh, I'm a disaggregationist all the way. I always want to see the data, and it's because I do believe in moving the big rock first. I think if we think to the most successful social movements that have ever existed, they were all built on the civil rights movement, even globally, because the biggest rock in the United States was always race. So when we moved that rock first, it led the way to the gay rights movement, it led the way to the women's rights movement, to the ability movement, and it put DEI and affirmative action in the workplace all around the world. So I believe that if you help who's most harmed first, it helps everybody else. So yeah, I'm definitely a disaggregationist all the way.
Well, thank you for letting me ask the question and for sharing. All right.
Let me
So,
add one thing to that. One thing to
oh
that.
yeah. Yep.
Sometimes you can change. Now, I haven't because I'm just like that. But depending on where you are and where you are in your career or your life, you might become one of these other archetypes. You can move. It's a journey. I've been some of them occasionally, but I always come back to that one. So my journey's been pretty circular.
Awesome. Well, great. Well, so we do have questions coming into the chat. So let me start moving our way through some of them. One says, I can't wait for your book to come out. I look forward to taking the short survey to find out my archetype. Will the book include the survey, and will there also be assessments for the other two models?
Absolutely. And in fact, the assessments of the other two models will show up on the website. You'll get a, if you go to our website, if you do the survey, it gives you the option to put an email in, which will then notify me that you're interested in doing the other surveys. As they are built, because I want to see how this one works, as they're built, you'll get a notification that they're available and you can take them. The ones that are going to be available on the website are going to be sort of modified. They're going to be a little bit shorter. The book is going to have a much more in-depth one, so you can go through that. And I haven't quite figured out how we're going to do that. I think it would make sense for you to know before you read the book where you are. So I might put those out on the website and let people take the more extended one so that when they actually get to the book, they have a better sense of where they're going. I haven't figured it out yet, but yeah, there will be shorter versions of it and longer versions of the surveys.
Wonderful. I have a question. Is there a difference between affirmative action and DEI?
Yes, affirmative action. Affirmative action was what came out of the 60s. And that was what was necessary when there were no Black people at all in the workplace. You had to come and do that. However, affirmative action is often conflated with quotas and those kinds of things, and it's been weaponized in this environment. The reality is this: there have not been quotas in the workplace since the 1970s with the Bakke decision. There are no quotas in the workplace. They're illegal. Okay, that doesn't happen. DEI, and I try not to use the acronym too much. I prefer to say diversity, equity, and inclusion because that acronym has gotten so weaponized. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is simply about saying that once you get people into an organization, just having people there doesn't matter. You have to work to make it inclusive, and you have to give them equity so they stay. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is simply the way organizations, businesses, and the world are going to have to work because diversity is not a choice. Diversity is destiny. It's a given. It's not going to change despite some people's best efforts to go after it. Equity is going to be necessary if you want to keep people in place. Inclusion is the active part of you that gets there. Now, if I'm perfectly honest, I don't know that equity is something we're ever going to achieve in my lifetime because, like I said, the world's inequitable. However, I think within organizations who have the ability to define what inclusion means for them uniquely and therefore what equity means for them uniquely, there is a possibility. So I'm a firm believer that the business world has the best potential to actually make significant difference in the rest of the world. Because if they don't, we see that government won't. Government has changed. We see what's happening now. So we cannot depend on the public sector. So it's going to be up to the private sector. And the private sector can do whatever it wants within its own walls at this point. So if the private sector steps up to this work, then we have a possibility that it'll change society.
Mm, thank you. Next question says, Janet, what are you doing to keep your stamina up during a hostile environment? How are you taking care of yourself?
Bourbon helps. But no, seriously, seriously, this work has never been easy. And I've had so many colleagues who have either been pushed out after the big push to get all these people in these jobs in 2020, and now they're being pushed out, or they've just tapped out. They're just too tired. They don't want to do the work anymore. Um, I kind of feel like this is the moment I was born for. This is the time when I need to do this work now more than ever. As I said in my thing, now more than ever. But it isn't easy and it is exhausting. And I just get up every day because I do believe what I said at the end of that presentation, that diversity is not a problem to solve, it solves problems. I believe that I need to help people deliver value in the workplace. I don't worry, I don't believe, okay, I know I'm gonna beat up for this. I don't believe in the term belonging. I actually think belonging is bullshit because I don't think anybody can create it. And I don't think you can give it to anybody. And if you tell people you should have a sense of belonging, then you're putting the onus of inclusion on the person who's been excluded. If you tell you're building a space of belonging, you've decided that you've created some monolithic space that everybody should belong to. And the question you should ask yourself is, to whom does the space belong originally? So I don't believe in those kind of terms. I don't believe in DEI. I don't believe in any of those terms. So if the way I keep going is I spend a lot of time fighting for clarity. And it's kind of what keeps me sane. I don't get swayed by the rhetoric and that kind of stuff. I go for the details. I go for the facts. I go for the objective points and everything. That's how I kind of anchor myself. But yeah, this is not a fun time to be in this business. I wish I liked math and could be an engineer or something. It'd be a lot easier. But thank you for asking.
As people think about this model, are there specific contexts where one approach is better than another, or is this more about individual motivations?
It is very much about individual motivations. But like I said, motivations change. I believe that the more you do the work, the more you expand how you view the work. It's possible that your motivations could change. It's also possible, and I'm going to deal with this in the book, that you're a hybrid of these things. It is possible that you are one type of personality in one point in your life, in your career, and another in another. But I ultimately believe that you have a primary personality. I'll use myself as an example. Um, when I'm a disaggregationist, when I worked in a company that was kindred, where the problem was senior leadership was cliquish and they just didn't, so equity wasn't happening because they were a small clique. I didn't go about doing the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion the same way I did when I worked for UPS, which was a big, national, global company. In this smaller company, what I did was I figured out who was most harmed, and it just happened to be Black women. We were losing a slew of them every year. And rather than try to put in place really strict policies and procedures in a company that wasn't going to adhere to them and didn't care about them because, cliquish, I quietly advocated for people directly to leadership. If I saw somebody who was not doing okay, I'd go to leadership and say, "You're going to lose this person. What are we going to do?" I didn't do it that way at UPS, but I was still a disaggregationist. There are times when I am more of an opportunist. But even in being an opportunist, because in fact, I think I'm always an opportunist. I always believe that it's about delivering value and outcomes. I don't care if you like me. I care if you take care of me and you value what I do. So I'm always that. But the way I get to that is by being a disaggregationist. So yes, I think it can change. I think you can view the world differently. I think you can go to different parts of the world and be different. I truly believe that maybe sometimes in different companies and organizations you can be different, but I'm a firm believer that you have a basic archetype because whatever that archetype is, it's the way you've grown up seeing equity in the world. And that doesn't change for a lot of people. You take something radical to make that change. But the thing is this, none of these archetypes are bad. And we need every one of them. At any given time, you need one of them. And if you are lucky enough to be in a place where there's an actual team of folks, that doesn't happen too often, just imagine what would happen if you had one of each and everybody knowing what it is they're good at and figuring out together what the environment is like and using their own particular strengths to drive the work. That would be amazing.
Mm, Appreciate you sharing that.
Sure.
How, another question, how to use these archetypes to navigate through a world that has set fire to all of our DEI progress recently?
Well, I mentioned that until I kind of figured out who I was very frustrated all the time because I couldn't understand why, when I was doing the things I did, it just didn't work. And I had to figure out what each one of those elements was and figure out how then to make them all work together. So I really wrote this book because I knew how hard it was for me. And I said I can make it easier for anybody else. That being said, if we think about society right now, like an organization, um, and give it one of those categories, we know it's not woke. That we know for sure. And since this is a group that I know, I really struggle with kindred as the K for that. I had another word I wanted to use, clan-ish, with a lowercase k, but I was told that that wouldn't work. I couldn't do that. But when I think about what the society that we have, I think that's a more stringent way of looking at it. We are in what would be considered a kindred organization. That's our society. So each of us figuring out what our archetype is, that can help us figure out how we're going to navigate the society. As a disaggregationist, I'm always going to go look for data. I'm always going to fight for clarity. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you will see me come at people for using saying replace DEI with MEI. I despise the word meritocracy. If you know how that word originated, you'd understand why. But I seek clarity because that's what I do. And I do that not only in my work, but I do that in society. Because right now, like I said, if you think about a company that is in that sort of kindred area, I think of companies like Abercrombie and Fitch. If you have younger daughters, you may know Brandy Melville. They did a whole nasty Netflix video about them. That's what our society is like now. It is saying that we are concerned about one or two distinct groups and nobody else. So if you figure out who you are and what your view of equity is and how you tend to go about inclusion, you can extrapolate that to do the best you can do. Because at some point, we are going to have to get in this work or there's no hope for us. So we all have to figure out how to do the work. And it's a lot frustrating right now. I think all of us are trying to figure out what to do, and it's changing every day. But part of that is figuring out who you are.
Hard to keep up these days.
Oh yeah.
Um, Question here says, could you please share an example of a time in which you observed people of different archetypes best working together? And are there different archetypes that you found work particularly well and capitalize on each other's strengths?
Let me answer the second part of that question first. It depends because none of these archetypes operate in a vacuum. So whereas you might have two that work very well together in one environment facing a certain set of issues, they may not work so well together in another. So that depends. In terms of thinking about when I've ever had a group that worked well together, um, I can think of one, but it wasn't a team that was necessarily working specifically toward diversity, equity, and inclusion work. They were doing other things, but it was it was a very aware team, and just personally, we all felt strongly about equity personally. And so you had me, the disaggregationist, who was always walking around going, we need to deal with the issue here. We need to build these. It was a communications team. We need to build these things. We need to look at this. I can see who's not in this. Then you have the globalist of the team, who's kind of saying, yeah, but I understand that that's an issue right here in the United States, but we need to look at this. This is bigger. It's not just here. What if we do it here? What's it going to mean over there? Um, and then I'm trying to think who else is on that team now that I think about them. We had an opportunist who was always like, what are we going to sell with this? What if we do this? What do we need to tell marketing about this? I think a really good example of a team that did not know until until they were told who they were was a senior leadership team I worked with, where the CEO had a definite vision about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and would call, his senior leaders together and yell at them quarterly about, not meeting their numbers. And finally, we had a conversation. And I said to him, I said, you're not going to get this done if your senior leaders aren't on board. He goes, well, how am I supposed to get them on board? I said, you're going to have to learn, or I'm going to help you talk to them in a language they understand. And so, although these don't actually fit these I guess I could make them fit the categories exactly because they weren't necessarily doing the work. You have somebody who's head of an operations team. They got a different view of what equity needs to look like when they're on a shop floor or a factory floor, as opposed to the person who's doing marketing work. They got a different view of what equity equates to them. The same way I had to go to each one of them and have a discussion about what diversity, equity, and inclusion meant in their vertical markets is the same way we do this work. When you're on a team, depending on who you have and depending on where you are, what you're trying to do, you let those people do their best. But it really does depend on where you are and what you're trying to do. But in the book, I will show some of those matchups.
Thank you.
Okay.
We definitely have more questions. You still ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
Okay.
Always.
I have one that says, I love this excuse me, I love this very pragmatic and practical approach. Do you see a place for using these models in level setting when engaging in conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I think so. One of the things I'd like to do, if I ever get the book written, um, is to build some workshops where I can go in and help people actually figure out how to be these things, use these things, work together as a team, figure out who they are. Um, I think practically, if you understand who you are, what I hope is you'll do the same thing I did. You'll start seeing these archetypes in the world. It's sort of like when I started seeing it and started figuring it out, I was like, oh, wow, okay, there are five of them. Um, when you start seeing it, I think you are in a position where you can have the conversation with other people about who they are. And if you can get them to understand your language, one of the things that's great when you talk about issues in diversity, equity, and inclusion is a shared language. So if you can say to somebody, not, and if you can think about these archetypes as positive when maybe you didn't before, let's say you come up against the neutralist and you think that, they're talking to you and you think they're saying, I'm colorblind or whatever, rather than saying to them, hey, look, that colorblind stuff doesn't fly, which is not going to get you very far. If you could think about the fact that maybe what they're doing is saying, I believe in equity, then maybe if you get them to understand what they're doing, you can push them a little bit further and say, yeah, you believe in it. But if you're not talking about creating a level playing field first, then you're in the colorblind world. Is that where you want to be? So it gives you a language to have conversations with other people and hopefully get other people to understand who they are. So at the end of the day, we all work better doing what we do.
Thank you. I have someone asking, why is it important to know your type?
Because otherwise, if you're trying to do this work, you will make yourself go crazy. If I hadn't figured out, and until I figured out that that's the way I viewed the world, I was frustrated a lot. So I think it is important because I think, A, it keeps you from going crazy. It keeps you from banging your head against walls. It keeps you from feeling like I keep doing this work and it never works for me and burning out. I think it's also important because it lets you lean into what you're good at and you can narrow what you're good at. And you can come in eventually and figure out in any given situation how you can do what you're best at. Because we need everybody to do their best and we need all types. So I think it is important. For me, it's important. And I think it's important for anybody who really cares about this work.
Thank you. I have another question that asks, what should the role be for faith communities in the context of this work?
Hmm. Well, it depends on the faith. Um, I mean, that's kind of a broad question because some faiths don't necessarily believe in equity. I think what we're seeing in this country is sort of a weaponization of Christianity in a way that is problematic. I think it's problematic for me. Um, but I'm thinking about that. I suppose if you think about the fight for equity, depending on what your religious beliefs are, if there is a tenet in your religion that, you know, the do unto others. And I think most religions have some form of that. Do unto others as you have them do unto you. You know, the Wiccans have the threefold rule. They have a karma. Most religions have got something that says basically treat people the way you want to be treated. That's equity. So I think that these same beliefs, if laid over a religious, a faith community's beliefs, if that religion has a belief in some sort of equity, I think there are things that could be helpful. Now you got me thinking. I'm going to figure that out. But but I can see that. I mean, because if you think about it, maybe you think, maybe you're one of those people who thinks that, you know what, I believe in equity, but I believe that everybody should be treated the way I want to be treated, which means I got to step in and make sure that people get that. That's one of those. Or you could say, I think everybody should be treated the same way, but you know, it depends on what they're willing to do on their own to get there. So, I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, but I think that, like I said, if you have a religious belief or religious foundation that believes in any sort of do unto others, then I think you're talking about equity.
This jumps back a minute to previous answer you were sharing. It's a related question, so I'm not sure if you have more to add to it.
Okay.
Says, thank you for your presentation. Can you talk more about the neutralist archetype and how neutralists are not supportive of mediocrity? How could a person persuade a person who is a fan of mediocrity that there is a need for leveling the playing field? Again, I know you're talking a little bit about that. These are common discussions in these times. And it also says, and I love bourbon.
Thank you. And I think you meant meritocracy. I hope that's what you meant.
Oh, what did I say? Goodness, I'm sorry.
You
It's been
said
a long day.
mediocrity, which is,
Goodness.
you know,
Woo, no,
that
meritocracy. My
too.
bad.
That's okay.
Woo.
Meritocracy. Let's go back to the word. The word was invented like around 1958. And the guy who came up with the word in a book that he did, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was a sociologist. His definition of meritocracy was actually not a good one. He did not see meritocracy as a good thing. What he said was, I see that if we go into a society of meritocracy, what's going to happen is that people are going to equate power with ability. And so the more power they have, they're going to be the able class. That is exactly what we have right now. So when you have these people running around talking about meritocracy right now, what they're saying, what they're saying is there's some assumptions there. There's an assumption that because I am the dominant class, I am the best one. So so then therefore meritocracy is, you need to compete, you need to be me. You cannot have meritocracy in a society where you don't have equal access. If you do, then meritocracy just becomes a code word for exclusion. So when you think about being a neutralist, and that was a hard one for me. That was really a hard one for me as I looked through it because I kept finding people and said, that's that colorblind stuff. That's colorblind stuff. I had to come across and dig really deep to find people who believe that things should be equal if there is an equal playing field. Now, I think that is very aspirational. Like I said, as a disaggregationist, I say in an inequitable world, equity itself is disruption, but that means disruption. So I think neutralists who are serious about this work, who understand that you have to level the playing field, they're going to lean into the interventionist stage sometimes. They're going to be disruptors. I think anybody who seeks to build equity in this society is a disruptor. But neutralists, like I said, they should be about the work of creating those level playing fields so then everybody can get on them and do the work that they want to do. But it's really easy if you're not careful, if you're in that framework to say everybody should be judged. The best person should get something. The best person should get the job. Meritocracy should be if you're the best, you win. But who defines best? I mean, I think if we look at our federal government right now, that was supposed to be the best and the brightest, not too best, not too bright. But if you have a society that says that's how you define the best and the brightest, I personally wouldn't want to be that. You also have people who use meritocracy to exclude others because whoever owns a definition determines what it is. It doesn't work unless everybody has access, unless the playing field is level.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions posted. Last call. If anyone has other questions, please go ahead and post it now. We're coming towards 8:30, but we probably have time for a few more here. As long as Janet's still got the stamina.
I got it.
Okay. So I have kind of two related comments slash questions. Says, how might you envision this model helping public school system educators come together to strengthen education? And the person says, I asked that question coming from my experience as an advocate for refugee students of all ages.
Well, I think it works the same way. I think it works, once again, it depends on the situation. So it depends on the environment that you're in. You know, are you in a school district, or are you in a school where there are resources? You know, the students themselves might not have resources, but the school might. That's one kind of environment. If they have resources, they might fall into one of those other categories. They might be able to fall into one of those other categories. Or they could fall into either good or bad, either way, because they could be inclusive, they could afford to be inclusive, or they could be inclined to be exclusive. So they might fall in one of those four quadrants. If you are in an environment that is not privileged, then that's slightly different, because what you're up against is different. So at the end of the day, that's why I think you need all three models. You have to know who you are, but you got to be clear about where you are and what you're up against. So in terms of how you work together, if if using the language, you had a group of educators who understood who they were, and if using the language, you could agree on what your environment was, then if you could define what the problems were, it gets a whole lot easier to solve, because the disaggregationist is going to go after it one way. They're going to be looking for data. They're going to be trying to prove a case with facts. They're going to be objective. It's going to be that. The neutralist is going to be trying to figure out how to level the playing field. The globalist, if you have refugee students, is going to be looking at the cultural context that those children are involved in. Because, in this country, when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we generally are talking about race. But if you go to other parts of the world, it's gender. It may be identity. It could be age. So where these children come from, how you talk to them about equity, how you talk to their parents about equity, how you help them get equity may be different. A globalist is going to see that. They're going to be saying, equity is equity. We do what we have to do to make it happen. So I think that the language could help, but the thing that I think is the most helpful about, I hope is going to be the most helpful about this book, is it inclines you to ask a bunch of questions. Like I said, those four big questions. It inclines you not to just look at this big amorphous mess that we have and say, I don't even know where to start. It gives you a starting point, because you know who you are. You get to figure out where you are, and then you get to ask yourself a series of questions about, what are we dealing with here? And like I said, the fourth chapter in the book is designed to tell you how to make it work. That's where, the question somebody asked me earlier, I show how teams work together. I show how different people do different things in different situations. That's the hard part. And quite honestly, it's making my brain bleed, but I'm trying. And but I do think, even I can't think of any situation where the issue is trying to achieve equity, where this would not have some help. And that's why I went with personal approach and professional approach. Because if you have a personal inclination, your personal view of equity is how you're going to do it in the social sector, not in the corporate world, but then professionally, you're going to do it a different way. So I will try to expand on that a little bit more in the book and give some examples that are on both sides of that. And now you've got me thinking I should use education and the faith community. So thank you for that.
Well, credit to our wonderful audience this
Of
evening.
course.
Is there data to support the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in a corporate or non-corporate environment? If you could also comment on the importance of this in an academic environment.
Data. Data is a funny thing. Since about 2015, McKinsey, the big consulting firm, has been putting these stats out. And I actually use one of those stats in my TED Talk. I wouldn't do it now because I know better. But those stats are all correlative. They're not causative. And the reason is because, things like diverse companies are 35% more profitable. Yeah, they might be, but has anybody proven that diversity did it? The reason that's a problem is because people only support, in the corporate space especially, They only support what they value. And if you can't make a direct connection between diversity and positive outcomes, the bottom line, there's always going to be room for it to be vulnerable. That's exactly what happened this time. If those of us who do this work had 20 years ago made the causative case for diversity in corporate America, as opposed to leaning on the correlative cases, we wouldn't be having this problem right now because the people that care about making money care about assets. And I happen to believe that diversity is an asset. But until you treat it as one, which means you resource it, you spend money on it, you pay attention to it, you make people accountable for it, until you do that, it's not. So, that being said, I don't think a lot of the work has been done in that space. In my consulting business, I've actually built some other models. I like building models, but I've actually built some other models that are designed to help us in the corporate space draw a direct connection between diversity and um, business outcomes. Finding business needs and saying, you ask the question, what are you solving for? And the second question after that is how can diversity help me solve for it? And putting things in place so that you can actually prove it. Because if you can prove it, then you can argue for it to be resourced. So I think the second part of your question was, is there data in the educational space? Judith, what was the second part of that again?
Yep, I'm pulling it back up.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Um, if you could comment on the importance of this in the academic environment.
Oh, okay. I should think, although it's a little bit different in the academic environment, because what you don't have in the academic environment is a mandate to make money. Corporations exist to do one of two things: make money or save money. That's it. And those of us who care about this work sometimes get it twisted when we think that companies are doing things because it's the right thing to do. They're not. They don't do anything because it's the right thing to do. They do something because it's a valuable thing to do. When you're outside of that equation, it gets a little bit murkier. On the one hand, it's better because you can make an argument for doing the right thing. It's a right thing to do. What I don't know, because I have not really studied the educational sector, is how much data is being collected. But I would imagine that there are probably some of the same problems in that people are not directly connecting an outcome to diversity. So even in the academic world, you have outcomes. I think about Davidson. What is the job of Davidson? What is its job? Davidson's job is to produce really smart kids who can go out and make a change in the world. That's the outcome. So if that's the outcome, how are we tying diversity to that? Those who know what I've been working on a little bit, I actually, after Project 87, I moved to start funding another program that is designed to make Davidson the center for building inclusive leaders. And my belief in that is, let's say what the outcome is. Let's decide now that the outcome is 10 years from now. We want our product, which is students, to be making inclusive decisions, to be inclusive leaders. And we'll have to define what that means. But then we reverse engineer a way to make that happen. So how is diversity going to help us do that? It's going to be diversity of education. It's going to be diversity of students. It's going to be a diversity of instructors. It's going to be a diversity of experiences. All those things. We don't want to just put them in a monolithic environment. But when we do that, we're going to have to show exactly how that helped. That's research, you have to pay attention. But none of this works if you don't tie it to an outcome, because you can't measure it if you don't. I mean, what does the right thing look like? What does belonging look like? How do you measure those things? So I think even in the academic space, the question is, what is the outcome you're going for? Start with the question, what are we solving for? And then the second question is, how can diversity help us solve for it? And then figure out how to tie them together. And that's where the data comes from.
Wonderful. And again, we just really want to share our gratitude with everyone who joined us tonight, and really wish everyone a lovely rest of your afternoon or evening, wherever you may be.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Janet.